topic today is ordinary compassion. And I think it's a very good thing for us to be just talking about in the middle of what all's going on in our world, places like Charlottesville and Barcelona. What can you and I do right here and right now in our ordinary lives? What can we do to impact and to transform the wrongs we see unfolding around us? That's what we're considering today, and I think many of us have probably been considering that this past week. Is there anything I can do to help? Tom mentioned our book of the month, Ordinary Goodness, by our own Dr. Edward Filioun, and I am loving reading that book and also hearing Dr. Edward speak about it. There's two things in particular I'm loving. One is that the seemingly ordinary act of bringing attention to good in our lives, noticing it, praising it, giving thanks for it, embodying it, expressing it, that our ordinary daily life bringing ongoing attention to good actually is helping to proliferate good on our planet. I love that. The second thing I love about the book is Dr. Edwards' stories about the spiritual wisdom he gained from his grandmother. And I have to admit, I'm a little bit envious because both sets of my grandparents spoke Slovak, so I didn't have access to their wisdom. And so, for the purposes of this talk today, I have adopted a grandmother. I don't think she'll mind. It's Mother Teresa. I mean, come on, if you're going to have a grandmother who's got spiritual wisdom, let's go to the top. Mother Teresa certainly is the embodiment of compassion, going right to those very places where human suffering was most obvious, the poor, the diseased, the forgotten, and bringing her presence of love and healing. And so it seems appropriate that we consider how we can transform the world with our ordinary compassion, that we begin with some wisdom from her. Never worry about numbers, she said. Help one person at a time and always start with the person nearest you. Where God put you, she reminds us, that's your vocation. It's not what we do, but how much love we put into it. And finally, not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. I also brought along two of my, I don't want to say imaginary friends. They're very real to me. On your left is Avalokiteshvara, and on your right is Kuan Yin. They actually are the same being in two different cultural guises. They both began life in India. When the Buddha attained enlightenment, one of the blessings of that was that it allowed for any of us to be able to attain enlightenment. And so Avalokiteshvara was about to be enlightened when he realized, no, my path is different. I'm going to wait until all beings, all people are ready to be enlightened, and then I will step into enlightenment with everybody. Meanwhile, I'm going to do what I can to relieve the experience of suffering in the world. So, rightfully so, Avalokiteshvara is honored for the being an embodiment of compassion. You'll see Avalokiteshvara around our center, always sitting cross-legged or in some sort of relaxed pose, but clearly the look on his face indicates that he's holding the highest thoughts for all of us. Now, when Buddhism went from India to China, Avalokiteshvara in Hindi became Kuan Yin in Chinese. And also, for some reason, Avalokiteshvara took on kind of a femme look. But if you take a very close look at her, you'll notice that actually it's an androgynous figure. And how wonderful is that? That compassion is embodied in an androgynous being available to all of us, whoever we are, and allowing all of us to be the ones who can emulate her or him in expressing compassion. If you take a look around the center, you'll see Kuan Yin's. There's a beautiful one greeting us as we come in from the parking lot. And often you'll see her holding a vessel pouring compassion onto the world. As Buddhism spread, so did Kuan Yin. And in various countries, a slightly different look in Thailand from, say, Japan. And of course, the name changed into the local language. So in Japan, the name is Kanon. And there is a story about a businessman who so loved Kanon, who so loved this embodiment of compassion and himself tried to emulate it, that when he founded a company, he called it Kanon. And here in the United States, we more typically say Canon when we see it on our printers and our cameras. I love that. Someone who's stood so strongly for the spiritual value of compassion that that name is stamped on products. Compassion is stamped on products that going all over the world. By the way, Dr. Kim Kaiser refers to these as spiritual action figures. Now, I know it sounds funny, and it actually contains truth, because when I see these figures, they remind me of the existence of compassion, and they inspire me into spiritual acts of compassion. I don't pray to them, but I allow them, I allow their image to remind me to be more compassionate. So, what is compassion? Well, literally, the word originally, compassion, means with suffering. Another way to say that is to suffer together. Now, as Science of Mind students, I think that's probably the last thing we want to do, is to emphasize suffering in others and to do our part by joining in with suffering. Fortunately, the way we currently use the word compassion refers to the feeling that we get when we witness someone else's suffering and we feel motivated to help relieve that suffering. Does that sound right to you? When you feel compassion, it's when witnessing somebody else's suffering and that feeling that comes up of wanting to do something to help. Certainly many of us saw this in ourselves this week as we witnessed injustice and cruelty and death, and we're asking ourselves, what can I possibly do to relieve the experience of suffering in the world? So let's consider how our ordinary compassion can help us answer that question. To begin, I've been thinking about compassion as having three aspects, kind of a three-step process, and that process being listening, praying, or being still and listening to intuition, and taking appropriate action. Listening, praying, taking appropriate action. This week, the Centers for Spiritual Living Diversity Commission issued a statement in response to Charlottesville, and I would like to share some excerpts. The statement begins by condemning the horrifying events that transpired and also sending deepest condolences to the families of Heather Hires and State Troopers Pilot Burke M.M. Bates and Lieutenant H.J. Cullen, sending condolences, quote, as we pray for peace, equity, and justice. The statement continues, despite the unfortunate behavior of others and the long legacy of institutional supremacy, we must not lose sight that love conquers hate and that we are all one. We all must acknowledge that racism and supremacy still exist today and have the courage to stand up for what is right and to denounce what is wrong. They also describe the resources they offer, including facilitating conversation circles known as Listening from Love. And they restate the Centers for Spiritual Living purpose to support everyone in realizing their spiritual magnificence, and add, that is no easy task when there is fear and uncertainty. All people need safe places to be seen and heard. And finally, they say, now more than ever, we must stand together for peace, harmony, and inclusion if we intend to do our part to create a world that works for everyone. One of the reasons I share this is the emphasis on listening as a healing agent. Here at the center, one of my jobs is being the director of Heart and Hand, our spiritual care program. If you come from a Christian background, you might know it as spiritual care. And if you grew up in a small church or you watch British TV, you might have some image of when somebody's sick, it's actually the spiritual leader in the community, the rabbi or the minister or the vicar or the priest going to visit that person. Well, in a community of 3,500 people, it's not possible for one person to make all the visits. So we use a model of peer support where congregants train to be able to be with other congregants who are in situations of illness or death or grief or loss. And here we are also founded in a spiritual philosophy that says that every moment of our eternal lives, every moment, the Divine One is present with us, around us, in us, for us, and indeed as us. So if you or I are sick or suffering, Spirit hasn't gone anywhere. Spirit as you is still present and functioning. The appearances may allow us to forget that, but that is the truth. So, in our model of spiritual care, if someone is suffering, I recognize that I cannot provide answers for them. In fact, I don't need to because Spirit is right there doing it. What I can do is to be lovingly present and affirmatively listening in such a way that allows the person to be open and guided by their own divine intelligence as to what is best for them. We don't provide remedies. We create the container of loving listening that allows for the person in distress to come up with their own best answers for themselves. Perhaps you can appreciate that this kind of listening is not easy at first. It takes some practice. We are so compassionate that if we see somebody suffering, we want to rush in and fix it and help them and give them advice and give them ideas and tell them what we would do to make it all better, none of which probably is relevant to them. So we have to learn just to listen. It's not easy keeping our mouth closed and our ears open, but when we do, we empower others to pay attention to their own innate wisdom and divine guidance. A Center for Spiritual Living minister, Reverend Patrick Pollard, defined compassion as the act of loving kindness to others that awakens them to the truth of their own being. That awakens them to the truth of their own being. And affirmative, open listening is just such an act of loving kindness. Listening, even when what is being expressed is coming from a place of fear and suffering, yet holding the highest vision of the person speaking the words. Dr. Edward and I and the other ministers here at the center are in a Gmail group with Centers for Spiritual Living ministers around the world. And given the events of the week, there were many emails among us offering thoughts and prayers and insights. I'd like to share this personal story from Reverend Alice Reed. I watched a beloved musician outrage publicly on Facebook. They were really upset, understandably, but the negative energy of hating the haters was intense. Then I witnessed a healing in them as they posted about compassion and forgiveness. And I realized that all the outrage had to be spent first before they could access the love within. It showed me the elegance of how the light is always alive in the darkness. Now, this process of venting and then returning to spiritual truth actually sounded familiar to me, because if something's upset me in my life, some petty something, I grab my husband and I start ranting, kind of incoherently about who did what and why and what wasn't my fault, and I'm so innocent and hurt, and he just sits there and he listens to me venting. And eventually, the rant dies down, and I say, and so my prayer request is, and it's typically to return to my own peace, to return to my own knowing of divine love in myself and others. This kind of they hurt me turns into I need more love for myself and for them. What I'm complaining about leads to seeing what my highest self is asking of me. And so I find myself beginning, I emphasize beginning, to listen to other people's negativity in a new way. Listening for what is the germ of good waiting to blossom forth. And asking myself, is there anything I can do in this moment to assist that germ in blossoming forth? Maybe yes, maybe no. Now, As metaphysicians, we know that ultimately there is only good. We know that for each of us, for every one of us, the innate truth of our own divine being is perfection and wholeness, nothing lacking. That's who we really all are, divine beings of love and light. Obviously, we do not always experience ourselves, other people, or our world that way. So, Ernest Holmes has provided some very helpful guidance for us and how our philosophy can come into play. He said, "We do not deny the body, nor do we deny the mind. What we do is affirm the spirit." Is someone experiencing the flu? Yes. Is someone so stressed in their thinking that they're losing sleep? Yes. Do these seem to be real experiences to them? Yes. Are these permanent, unchangeable qualities of their being? No. And that's where we put our attention. We put our attention on that container of love in which all kinds of different things may be playing out. And it is that affirming of the reality of the presence of love, the presence of spirit in the situation that allows for the temporary conditions to apparently seem to change. More food for thought in this email from Reverend Gregory Toole. As I reflect on recent events in Charlottesville and other examples of division, bigotry, win-lose paradigms, blame, and other forms of separation, I find myself wanting to expand my sense of compassion for all humans. Various forms of hatred and bigotry have profoundly impacted me in my lifetime. And today I wonder, is there any way to end the ways we separate ourselves as humans? Is the answer to segment those who themselves are espousing division and separation? Or is it to stand more firmly in our knowing of oneness and unity? The answer for me is that I cannot have animosity toward any other being, and I must make the effort to understand and empathize with those who are in pain of all forms, those suffering from systemic injustices, as well as those in such fear of others that they act in harmful ways. Yes, I speak out against injustices, and at the same time, even more of my energy is invested in offering more love, more compassion, and more understanding to all beings. According to the Dalai Lama, our very survival as humans depends on compassion. And I think we've gotten a sense of that this week, of how true it is that our very survival as humans depends on compassion. I think we got a taste of what a compassionless world is like, and I think that none of us wants to live there. Good news. There is an organization in Seattle, you can look them up online, Compassionate Action Network, CAN, Compassionate Action Network. And their goal is for compassion and compassionate action to become the new normal for society within 10 years. Yeah. I read that and I recommitted myself to daily exercise in the hope I can be around in 10 years to witness it. I think that's what we're all being called to do, to be the highest expression of good that we can be. But how do we know what the compassionate action is in any given situation? Well, that's where the second aspect of compassion comes in, prayer. First listening, then prayer, which is another way of saying turning in for guidance from our highest self, our divine self. You know, we use affirmative prayer around here a lot. Prayer that affirms the presence of good, of spirit in all conditions. In fact, I want to be sure you know that our center is holding a service offering prayer in response to the events in Charlottesville. It's this Wednesday evening, and the first part of the service will be dedicated to prayer, after which Reverend Jane Beach will speak, appropriately enough, on the topic, Love Leads the Way. There are so many examples around here of prayer happening on the phone, in Gritton Chapel, online. And there are so many examples from so many people around here of how affirmative prayer has resulted in healing of aspects of their life, be it financial or relational or health, peace of mind, as well as clarity about the next step in a difficult situation. And so it was about a week ago when I found myself really agitated by the tension and the feeling of imminent doom surrounding relations between the U.S. and North Korea that I invited our 96-plus practitioners to join me in a 21-day focus of dedicated and ongoing prayer for peace. The first day that I did my own prayer work for the revealing of peace in the world, an email came in with a petition in support of enforcing the legal process that already exists that restricts how our nation can enter into war. And of course, I saw that petition and I joyfully and I gratefully signed it. For me, that was definitely answered prayer. My world went from before prayer, I was in a world in which any moment we would be involved in nuclear destruction, and then after prayer, I was in a world where there were sane controls to prevent and contain that from happening and to contain the situation. And I was able to support that. So what I'd like to emphasize here is the role of the three-step process. Listening, in this case to my own fears, praying, in this case for peace, and taking appropriate action, in this case signing the petition. Now, we might argue, oh, well, that was no big deal. However, I think it is exactly what we're talking about today. Ordinary compassion, small acts done with love. So, what is your next step in offering compassionate action in your world? I'd like to invite us to take a moment in the sanctity of our own hearts to move toward that act of compassion by spending a few moments in those initial two steps of listening and prayer. So I invite you to turn within and allow your body to relax, noticing any tension that can be released, and to let the mind and the emotions relax, knowing that you are surrounded by love. You are in a universe that is for you. You are held in love. You are filled in love. And in this relaxed trust, I invite you to bring your attention to your life, your world, and just notice one thing that you know needs help. And so bringing your attention to this thing that is calling to you, I invite you to simply consider, what can I do? What is compassion calling me to do? What is mine to do? And remembering now that there is a power of good that is both beyond creation and within every aspect of creation. In fact, it is right who each of us is. This power of good working in, through, and as us, giving us everything we need to know and to act on expressions of love, expressions of compassion. So I welcome for us ongoing guidance as to what is the compassionate thing to do now and now. Ongoing guidance and the love and the courage necessary moment to moment to ensure that we are acting from our highest place, bringing good not only into our lives, but into our world and for the benefit of all beings. So it is in gratitude for the ways in which we see this good coming forth through us as a blessing agent in the world that I give thanks now as this word is released. And so it is. And I invite you just to take a moment to softly linger and to gently, slowly begin to bring your awareness back to this community of love that you have chosen to be in today.